The firelight flickers against polished amber, casting shadows that dance like memories across the hall. In the depths of Alfheim, where light itself seems to slow and soften, there once lived a god who had everything, except the one thing that mattered most. The amber catches each flame's movement, holding it for a moment before releasing it to dance again, like captured time itself waiting to be set free. I am your DrowZy storyteller. Tonight we follow an ancient path through the 9 worlds, where desire and devotion intertwine like the roots of Yggdrasil. This is the story of Skirnir's journey for Freyr, a tale of longing that began with a single glimpse and ended with magic that would echo through the ages. Let yourself drift with us into the realm of the Aesir, where even gods must sometimes depend on the loyalty of their friends, and where love proves stronger than the barriers that separate world from world. Freyr sat motionless in his high seat, golden hair catching the eternal light of Alfheim like spun sunbeams frozen in time. The hall around him hummed with the quiet activities of his household, servants tending fires that never dimmed, guards walking their measured rounds along corridors that stretched beyond mortal comprehension, the soft clink of dishes being cleared from tables where the god had not touched a single morsel for 11 long days. The servants moved with increasing concern, their luminous faces marked with worry lines that had not existed when this strange malady first took hold of their lord. These were the light elves of Alfheim, beings of pure radiance who had served the Vanir since the peace was made between the old gods and the new. They understood the delicate balance that kept their realm in harmony, how their lord's moods affected the very fabric of their world, how his joy brought abundance to every corner of existence, how his sorrow could dim the eternal light that was their birthright. For 11 days now, Freyr had neither eaten nor spoken. His food remained untouched on golden plates that caught the hall's radiance and threw it back in patterns of light and shadow. Wine sat undisturbed in crystal goblets, its surface still as polished mirrors. Even the honey cakes that had once been his particular pleasure lay forgotten, their sweetness growing stale in the perfumed air of Alfheim's greatest hall. The elves whispered among themselves in voices like wind chimes, their concern growing with each passing hour. Their lord, who commanded the rains that blessed Midgard's fields and the sun's warmth that awakened seeds in spring soil, who brought fertility to every field and orchard across the 9 worlds, sat frozen in a silence that seemed to spread through the very air like a slow plague of stillness. Outside the great windows of the hall, the effects of Freyr's melancholy were becoming visible to any who cared to look. The light of Alfheim, which had shone constant since the world's beginning, grew dimmer each day. The golden leaves on the trees that never knew winter began to lose their luster, fading from burnished gold to pale yellow to something approaching brown. Even the streams that sang eternal songs of joy and plenty had fallen to whispers, their voices uncertain and thin. In the gardens beyond, flowers that bloomed in impossible beauty began to droop their heads, though no blight touched them and no disease marred their petals. The very grass seemed less vibrant, as if the force that had always sustained Alfheim's perfect beauty was slowly draining away like water through cracked stone. Skirnir, faithful companion and most trusted servant, watched from the shadows of the hall with growing alarm. His weathered hands rested on the leather scabbard at his side, fingers tracing patterns worn smooth by years of faithful service and countless journeys undertaken at his lord's command. He had served Freyr since the early days after the war between the Aesir and Vanir, when the cosmos was still raw from conflict and the gods were learning to share the burden of keeping chaos at bay. Through all those long years, he had seen his lord through battles that shook the foundations of the world tree, through celebrations that lasted for mortal lifetimes, through the careful work of forging peace and dividing responsibilities among the divine families. He had carried messages to the frost giants in their ice-bound halls, had negotiated with dwarfs in their mountain kingdoms, had walked through the fires of Muspelheim on diplomatic missions that lesser beings would have considered impossible. But never had he seen Freyr like this, motionless as carved stone, eyes fixed on something that existed only in memory. The servants whispered that their lord was ill, but Skirnir knew better. He had seen sickness, both mortal and divine, and this was not its face. This was not the fever that comes with battle wounds, nor the weakness that follows overuse of divine power. This was something deeper, more dangerous, the kind of wound that could spread to the roots of the world tree itself, if left untended. The amber light shifted as clouds passed across Alfheim's eternal sky, and Skirnir made his decision. Whatever had stolen his lord's appetite and voice, he would discover it. Whatever had brought this stillness to the god of growth and plenty, he would find a way to break it. The hall held its breath as he stepped forward from the shadows, his footsteps the only sound in the vast, worried silence that had settled over the greatest of Alfheim's palaces like a shroud of golden silk. "My lord," Skirnir said softly, approaching the high seat where Freyr sat like a statue of burnished gold. His voice carried the careful respect of long service, but underneath lay genuine concern for the god who had become more than master to him, who had become, in the strange way of immortal friendships, something approaching family. "Your father Njorth sent me to seek the cause of your silence. The halls of Asgard echo with concern, and your realm grows dim in response to your mood." The words hung in the air between them for long moments, and Skirnir began to wonder if his lord had fallen so deep into his melancholy that even direct address could not reach him. But then Freyr's eyes moved for the first time in days, shifting slowly to meet those of his faithful companion. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of oceans, the depth of earth waiting for spring rain, and a weariness that seemed to encompass ages. "Skirnir, old friend, you have served me well through all seasons, through peace and war alike. You have walked through fire for my sake, have faced down dragons and giants, have carried my words to the ends of creation without question or complaint." He paused, and the very air seemed to hold its breath around them. "But this burden," his voice trailed off like wind through empty halls, "this burden I cannot ask you to share." Skirnir stepped closer, his weathered face earnest in the amber light that still streamed through the great windows. "Try me, my lord. I have walked through the fires of Muspelheim at your command, have negotiated with frost giants in the deepest caverns of Jotunheim where the roots of Yggdrasil freeze and crack with cold. What burden could be heavier than the loyalty I bear you? What weight could be greater than the friendship we have forged through centuries of shared purpose?" Freyr rose slowly from his seat, and with that movement, a faint warmth seemed to return to the hall. The flames in the great hearth flickered higher, as if responding to their lord's first voluntary motion in 11 days. He walked to the window that looked out over the undulating hills of Alfheim, where the light elves tended their eternal gardens with skills passed down through generations older than mortal memory. The view from this window encompassed leagues of perfect beauty, rolling meadows where grass grew in shades of gold and silver, orchards where fruit ripened in perpetual abundance, streams that caught the light and threw it back in patterns that would have driven mortal artists to weeping with their impossible perfection. But all of it seemed subdued now, muted by the shadow that had fallen across its lord's spirit. When Freyr spoke again, his words came like a confession whispered to the wind, each syllable heavy with shame and desperate longing. 11 days ago I sat upon Hlithskjalf, the All-Father's throne. You know the seat, the high chair from which one can see into all the 9 worlds, can watch the movements of gods and giants, elves and mortals alike. It is Odin's privilege to sit there, to survey his domain and guard against the threats that always gather at the edges of order. His hands gripped the window frame, knuckles showing white beneath skin that normally held the warm glow of summer sunshine. I should not have sat there, Skirnir, I should not have looked, but the All-Father was away on one of his wanderings and the throne stood empty, and I was curious about the broader reaches of creation, the places where my authority does not extend. Skirnir waited with the patience of long service, understanding instinctively that some truths must be drawn out slowly, like precious metal from deep ore. He could see the struggle in his lord's face, the battle between the desire to unburden himself and the shame that held the words prisoner in his throat. I saw her Skirnir. The words came out in a rush, as if speaking them quickly might somehow lessen their impact. In Jotunheim, walking from her father's hall, she was simply existing, going about some ordinary task, opening a door, stepping into sunlight. But when she raised her arms to lift the latch, light shone from her skin, light that illuminated all the worlds, sea and sky alike. The sight burned itself into my eyes, into my heart, into the very core of my being. The god turned from the window, and Skirnir saw something he had never seen before in his lord's face, the raw vulnerability of desperate longing, the kind of need that could drive even gods to madness if left unfulfilled. It was written in every line of Freyr's features, in the tremor of his hands, in the way his eternal composure had cracked like ice in spring. Her name is Gerthur, daughter of the giant Gymir, and now I cannot eat, cannot sleep, cannot think of anything but the light that shone from her arms when she moved in the sunlight of her father's courtyard. I am a god, Skirnir, master of fertility and growth, commander of the forces that bring life to every corner of existence, but I am powerless against this desire. It consumes me like fire consumes dry grass, and I fear. His voice broke. I fear it will consume everything else as well. The silence that followed Freyr's confession seemed to expand through the hall like ripples on a still pond, growing wider and deeper with each passing moment. Skirnir stood motionless in the golden light, his mind working through the implications of his lord's words with the methodical precision that had made him valuable as more than just a messenger. A god of the Vanir, fallen in love with a giant's daughter. It was not unheard of. The boundaries between the races had been crossed before in matters of the heart, but it was never simple, never without consequences that could reshape the delicate balance between worlds. The stories were full of such unions, gods who had taken mortal lovers and paid terrible prices, giants who had won divine hearts and brought chaos in their wake, immortal beings who had found love across the great divisions of race and realm only to discover that desire could be as destructive as it was beautiful. Some had ended in joy, their children becoming bridges between worlds. Others had ended in tragedy that still echoed through the halls of memory. "You wish me to go to her," Skirnir said quietly. It was not a question but a statement of understanding, the recognition that passed between two beings who had worked together so long that words were often unnecessary. He could read the hope and desperation in his lord's face as easily as he might read the weather in the changing light of Alfheim's eternal sky. "I cannot ask it of you." Freyr's voice carried all the weight of genuine regret. "The journey to Jotunheim is perilous enough under the best of circumstances, but Gymir is no ordinary giant. His hall is surrounded by flames that burn without fuel, magical fire that has never been quenched since the early days when the cosmos was still taking shape. His guards are hounds that never sleep, creatures bred from the wolves that hunt at the edges of the world, and they have been trained to recognize the scent of any being not welcome in their master's domain." He paused, his eyes distant with the memory of what he had seen from the All-Father's throne. "And Gerthur herself, they say she has a heart as cold as mountain ice, that she has refused every suitor who has ever come to her father's door. Giants and gods alike have sought her hand, offering treasures that could buy kingdoms, promising alliances that could reshape the balance of power between the worlds. All have been turned away with words as sharp as winter wind." Skirnir stepped closer, his weathered face earnest in the amber light that still struggled to maintain its usual brilliance. The lines around his eyes spoke of countless journeys through dangerous places, of messages carried through hostile territory, of negotiations conducted in halls where a single wrong word could mean death or worse. But they also spoke of successes, of impossible missions accomplished through patience and skill, of trust earned through deeds rather than words. "My lord," he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction, "I have served you faithfully for longer than mortals can remember. I have carried your messages to every corner of the 9 worlds, have faced dragons and giants, wolves and worms, have walked through realms where the very air would poison lesser beings, but I have never undertaken a mission as important as this one." He paused, choosing his words with the care of a master craftsman, selecting the finest materials for a work that must endure for ages. Around them, the hall seemed to listen, as if the very walls understood that they witnessed a moment that would be remembered in song and story for as long as the worlds endured. If this longing is killing you slowly, if it dims the light of Alfheim and threatens the fertility of all the worlds, then it must be addressed. The growing things depend upon your joy, the turning of seasons follows the rhythm of your heart. I have seen the signs already, crops failing in Midgard, fruit trees bearing less abundantly, even the eternal gardens of your own realm beginning to fade. This is not merely a personal matter, my lord. This is a crisis that threatens the fundamental order of existence. Freyr looked up, hope flickering in his eyes like the first star of evening appearing in a darkening sky. "What do you need?" "Your sword, my lord, the blade that never misses its mark, that can fight by itself against any enemy. The weapon that was forged in the early days when the cosmos was still taking shape, when the gods first learned to impose order upon chaos." Skirnir's voice was steady, but his eyes never left his lord's face. "And your horse, the one that can carry its rider through fire and darkness, over the boundaries between worlds, through the spaces where reality becomes thin and malleable." The requests were not small ones. Freyr's sword was legendary among the gods, a weapon that had tasted the blood of primordial monsters, that had carved its way through armies of dark elves and fire giants in the early wars that had shaped the cosmos. Its blade caught and held whatever light touched it, seeming to burn with inner fire that never dimmed. More than its supernatural sharpness, more than its ability to fight without a hand to guide it, the sword carried within it something of its owner's essence, his determination, his authority, his power to command the forces of growth and renewal. The horse was equally precious, though in different ways. It was not the largest or strongest of the divine steeds, but it possessed qualities that made it invaluable for journeys between worlds. Its hooves had touched roads that existed more in intention than in physical reality. Its eyes had seen the fires of Muspelheim and the ice of Niflheim without being blinded or frozen. It could carry its rider through the spaces between worlds, following paths that lesser creatures could not even perceive. Without hesitation, Freyr unbuckled his sword belt. The leather was worn smooth by ages of use, decorated with runes that seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles. The weapon's weight settled into Skirnir's hands like a living thing, and he could feel its power thrumming through his fingers like the pulse of a great heart. This was more than metal and magic. This was trust made manifest, the faith of a god in his most valued servant. "Take them both, faithful friend, take whatever you need." Freyr's voice carried depths of gratitude that made words seem insufficient. "But know this, if you succeed in this impossible task, if you can win Gerthur's heart for me, I will owe you a debt that all the treasures of Asgard could not repay. The gods themselves will sing of your courage, and your name will be remembered until the final winter comes to claim us all." Skirnir accepted the sword with reverence, feeling its power flow through him like liquid lightning. The blade seemed to recognize him, to accept him as a worthy bearer, though he knew it would never serve him as completely as it served its true master. This was a weapon that fought for love as much as for conquest, and perhaps that would be enough. "Then I go now, while the paths between worlds are clear and the barriers are thin." He paused at the hall's great doorway, turning back to face the god who had become more than lord to him. "But my lord, what shall I offer her? What gift could move the heart of one who has refused every suitor? What words could convince her to leave the safety of her father's hall for the uncertainty of a god's love?" Freyr pulled a ring from his finger, a band of gold so pure it seemed to contain captured sunlight. The metal held warmth even in the cool air of the hall, and runes of power glowed faintly along its surface. "Golden apples from Ithun's tree if she values youth eternal. treasures from the depths of the earth if she desires wealth beyond counting, but if those fail. He hesitated, and for a moment the god of plenty looked lost and young. Tell her of the alternative. Tell her what refusal means, not just for me, but for all the worlds that depend on the sun's warmth and the rain's blessing. Tell her that love, when it comes to gods, is never merely personal. It touches everything, reaches into every corner of existence, shapes the very fabric of what is and what might be. Skirnir's horse stood ready in the courtyard of Freyr's hall, its coat gleaming like polished silver in the eternal twilight that served as Alfheim's night. This was no ordinary steed. Its lineage traced back to the early days when the gods first learned to travel between worlds, when the paths that connected the 9 worlds were newer and more uncertain than they had since become. Its hooves had touched roads that existed in dream and intention. Its eyes had seen wonders that would drive mortal minds to madness with their impossible beauty. The horse turned its great head as Skirnir approached, and something like intelligence flickered in its dark eyes. It seemed to understand the gravity of the journey ahead, the weight of responsibility that rode upon this mission's success or failure. As Skirnir settled into the saddle with Freyr's sword at his side, he felt the animal's powerful muscles gather beneath him, ready for whatever distance they might need to travel, whatever obstacles they might need to overcome. The departure was swift but not without ceremony. No fanfare announced their leaving, no crowds of well-wishers gathered to see them off, but the very air of Alfheim seemed to pulse with awareness of their mission. Freyr's blessing settled around Skirnir's shoulders like a cloak woven from sunlight and determination, and the horses of the light elves whinnied softly from their stables, as if bidding farewell to a kinsman departing on a quest that would be remembered in song. The path from Alfheim to Jotunheim wound through the spaces between worlds, following routes that had been established in the earliest days when the cosmos was still settling into its final form. These were not roads in any sense that mortals would understand. They existed more in the intention to travel than in any physical reality that could be mapped or measured. They followed the great roots of Yggdrasil as the world tree extended its influence through all of creation, connecting realm to realm like the arteries that carry life through a vast body. As they rode, the landscape around them began to change with the subtle shifts that marked passage between worlds. The gentle, golden light of Alfheim gave way to stranger illuminations that painted the sky in colors that had no names in any mortal tongue. Here, the aurora borealis danced in sheets of green and silver that seemed to respond to their passage, bending and flowing like banners welcoming a hero home from war. There, phosphorescent mosses covered the rocks with cold fire that provided light without warmth, beauty without comfort. The horses' hooves struck sparks from stones that had never known the touch of sun or rain, each impact ringing like a bell in the strange acoustics of the between spaces. They passed through caverns that echoed with the sound of distant hammering from the dwarfs' forges, where master craftsmen worked with metals that existed nowhere else in creation, shaping tools and weapons for gods and heroes whose names would echo through the ages. The temperature began to drop as they moved further from Alfheim's eternal warmth, and Skirnir pulled his cloak closer around his shoulders. This was more than the normal cold of winter. This was the deep chill that came from traveling through regions where the fundamental forces of creation grew thin, where heat and light struggled against primordial darkness that remembered the time before stars. They rode through regions where time moved differently, where the normal laws that governed existence became fluid and uncertain. In one valley, Skirnir watched centuries of seasons cycle past in moments, trees growing tall and strong, bearing fruit, aging and falling to dust, new growth rising from their remains in an endless cycle of death and renewal that compressed eons into heartbeats. In another stretch of road, a single snowflake hung motionless in the air for what felt like hours, perfect and eternal in its crystalline beauty, each facet catching and holding light that had traveled impossible distances to rest there. The horse needed no guidance through these strange lands. It followed paths known only to the gods and their most trusted servants, roads that had been walked by Odin in his constant wanderings, by Thor on his journeys to the giants' halls for contests of strength and wit. Each step took them further from the familiar warmth of Alfheim and deeper into the wild, dangerous realm of Jotunheim, where the ancient enemies of the gods made their homes in ice and stone and primordial fury. As they drew closer to their destination, the very air began to change. The aurora gave way to a darker sky where unfamiliar constellations wheeled in patterns that spoke of alien purposes and intentions that had nothing to do with the concerns of gods or mortals. Ice began to form on Skirnir's beard, each breath coming in visible clouds that dissipated slowly in the thin air. The horses' hooves began to crunch through snow that grew deeper with each mile, and behind them their trail disappeared into mist and shadow that seemed to actively erase all trace of their passage. The silence grew deeper as they traveled, broken only by the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and the whisper of wind through ice-covered stones. This was not the comfortable quiet of Alfheim's gardens, but something older and more dangerous, the silence of spaces where few travelers dared to venture, where the very ground beneath their feet remembered conflicts that had shaped the early cosmos and might shape its ending as well. Ahead lay the Hall of Skirnir, surrounded by mysteries and guarded by powers older than the gods themselves. Behind them, Alfheim waited in slowly fading light for news that would either restore its glory or confirm its decline into something that would echo the twilight of all things. Between hope and despair, between success and failure, the silver horse carried its rider through the growing dark toward a confrontation that would determine not just the fate of a god's heart, but the balance of all the worlds that hung like fruit on Yggdrasil's mighty branches. The first sign of Gymir's hall appeared as a glow on the horizon, not the warm, welcoming light of hearth fires, but the fierce, dangerous radiance of magical flames. As Skirnir and his mount crested the final ridge before their destination, the full scope of the challenge became clear. Gymir's hall stood in the center of a ring of fire that rose higher than the tallest trees. The flames danced and writhed without fuel, fed by some ancient magic that traced back to the early days of the world. They cast their light in all directions, making the snow-covered landscape flicker between brilliant illumination and deep shadow. Between Skirnir and the fire ring, massive hounds paced in endless circuits. Their eyes glowed red as coals and their breath steamed in the cold air. They were giants among their kind, each as large as a horse, with teeth that could crack stone and loyalty that death itself could not break. They had been set as guardians by Skirnir himself, and in all the years since, nothing had passed them without their master's permission. Skirnir dismounted and studied the scene, his strategic mind calculating distances and possibilities. The flame ring had no visible gaps. The hounds never varied their patrol routes. The hall itself, visible through the dancing fire, looked like a fortress built to withstand siege by gods and giants alike. He reached for Freyr's sword, and the moment his fingers closed around the hilt, he felt its power flow through him like liquid lightning. This was a weapon that had tasted the blood of dragons, that had carved its way through armies of dark elves and fire giants. But more than its cutting edge, more than its supernatural sharpness, the sword carried within it the determination of its owner, Freyr's desperate love transformed into an instrument of will. "Well, old friend," he murmured to his horse, "we've come this far. Shall we see if love can indeed conquer all obstacles?" The horse whinnied softly and pawed the ground, ice chips flying from its silver hooves. It had carried riders through the fires of Muspelheim. These flames would not stop it. Together they had a chance. Skirnir remounted, drew the sword, and urged his steed forward. The blade blazed with its own light as they approached the fire ring. The hounds lifted their massive heads, sensing the approach of something beyond their usual experience. Their growls rumbled like distant thunder, echoing off the surrounding peaks. But as horse and rider reached the flames, something extraordinary happened. The sword's light seemed to push back against the magical fire, creating a narrow corridor just wide enough for passage. The horse leaped forward without hesitation, carrying Skirnir through the ring in a single bound that left them standing inside the protected circle, with the giant hounds now between them and escape. The hounds moved like shadows given substance, flowing across the snow-covered courtyard with deadly grace, their red eyes fixed on Skirnir with the intensity of predators who had never known defeat. The largest of them, a beast whose shoulder reached higher than a tall man's head, stepped forward with jaws already parting to reveal teeth like ivory daggers. But Skirnir did not dismount to fight them. Instead, he held Freyr's sword high, letting its light shine full upon the approaching guardians. The blade's radiance was not mere illumination. It carried within it the authority of the Vanir, the power of the god who commanded the sun's warmth and the earth's fertility. "I am Skirnir, servant of Freyr, son of Njorth," he called out, his voice carrying clearly through the cold air. "I come not as a thief or enemy, but as an ambassador on a mission of the heart. Stand aside, noble guardians, and let love's messenger pass." The great hound paused, tilting its massive head as if listening to something beyond human hearing. For long moments the tableau held, man and horse motionless in the center of the ring, sword blazing like a star, while around them the hounds waited with the patience of stone guardians. Then slowly the lead hound lowered its head in what might have been acknowledgement. The others followed suit, creating a corridor that led directly to the hall's great doors. They did not retreat. Their loyalty to Gymir remained absolute, but they recognized something in Skirnir's mission that transcended mere trespass. Skirnir urged his horse forward, moving with deliberate calm through the living corridor of giants' hounds. Their breath steamed around him as he passed, and he could feel the heat radiating from their massive bodies. Any sudden movement, any sign of aggression would unleash their full fury. But the sword's light seemed to create a bubble of peace around horse and rider, a sphere where violence was held in abeyance. The hall doors loomed ahead, carved oak bound with iron, decorated with runic inscriptions that seemed to shift and dance in the firelight. These were not mere decorations but active wards, protective spells woven into the very structure of the building. They would recognize friend from foe, ally from enemy. As Skirnir reached the threshold, the doors swung open of their own accord. Warm air flowed out to greet him, carrying with it the sense of burning wood, roasted meat, and something else, something that made his heart skip despite all his years and experience. It was the faint fragrance of apple blossoms, clean and sweet and impossibly fresh in this land of eternal winter. Beyond the doorway, voices could be heard, the deep rumble of giants in conversation, the lighter tones of their servants, and threading through it all like silver through copper, a woman's laugh that made even the flames seem to dance with greater joy. The interior of Gymir's hall exceeded even Skirnir's expectations. Massive timber beams supported a roof that disappeared into shadows above, and the walls were hung with tapestries that depicted the ancient history of Jotunheim, the building of the first mountains, the taming of the wild winds, the great alliances and feuds that had shaped the realm of giants. Long tables stretched the length of the hall, laden with treasures that spoke of Gymir's wealth and power. Golden plates caught and reflected the firelight, while drinking horns carved from the tusks of ancient beasts rested beside chalices of silver and crystal. The air was thick with the scent of roasted ox and honey mead, creating an atmosphere of prosperity and celebration. At the head table, Gymir himself held court. He was a giant even among his own people, his shoulders broad as a ship's beam, his beard the color of storm clouds shot with silver. His eyes, when they turned toward the newcomer, held the depth of mountain lakes and the calculating intelligence that had made him one of the most respected lords in all of Jotunheim. But it was the figure beside him that made Skirnir's breath catch in his throat. Gerther sat at her father's right hand, and even from across the vast hall he could understand why a god had been struck speechless by her beauty. Her hair fell like spun gold around shoulders that seemed carved from the finest marble. Her dress was simple in design but rich in execution, deep blue silk that caught the light and held it like captured stars. When she moved to lift her drinking cup, the motion was so graceful it seemed choreographed by the gods themselves. And when she smiled at something her father said, the warmth of that expression seemed to brighten the entire hall. This was not mere physical beauty, this was something deeper, a radiance that emanated from within and touched everything around her. Conversation in the hall had gradually died away as the inhabitants noticed the armed stranger in their midst. Servants backed against the walls, and the giants at the long tables turned to stare at this unexpected visitor. Some hands moved toward weapons, but Skirnir raised a massive hand for calm. "Welcome, stranger," the giant lord called out, his voice carrying easily across the hall. "Few pass the flame ring and the hounds without invitation. Fewer still enter my hall with a god's blade at their side. State your business, son of Asgard, and speak truly, for lies have short lives in the realm of giants." Skirnir stepped forward, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. He could feel dozens of eyes upon him, curious, suspicious, calculating. But most of all, he was aware of Gerther's gaze, steady and unafraid, as she studied this messenger who had come so far to reach her father's hall. "I am Skirnir, servant of Freyr of the Vanir," he announced, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space. "I come bearing gifts and a message of great import. The matter concerns not just my lord's heart, but the harmony of all the 9 worlds." Skirnir gestured to an empty place at his table, and servants hurried to provide Skirnir with food and drink befitting an ambassador of the gods. The giant lord's eyes never left his guest's face as the ritual of hospitality was observed, for even in Jotunheim, the ancient laws of guest friendship held sacred power. "Speak then, Skirnir of the Aesir," Skirnir rumbled once the formalities were complete. "What message does Freyr send that requires such dramatic entrance to my hall?" Skirnir rose, setting aside the drinking horn that had been placed before him. From within his cloak he drew forth the first of Freyr's gifts, 11 golden apples that seemed to glow with inner light. They were treasures beyond price, fruit from Aethun's sacred tree that granted eternal youth to those who tasted them. "My lord offers these tokens of his regard," Skirnir announced, placing the apples on the table where their light reflected off the polished wood. 11 golden apples from the goddess Aethun herself, each one worth a kingdom's ransom, each one a promise of youth that never fades. A murmur of appreciation ran through the hall. Even giants who lived for eons valued the gift of perpetual youth. But Gerther barely glanced at the precious fruit, her expression remaining calm and unimpressed. "Tell your lord his gifts are fair," she said, her voice carrying the clear tones of mountain streams, "but gold and youth cannot buy what is not freely given. I have no need of apples, no matter how precious their origin." Undeterred, Skirnir reached into his cloak again and withdrew the ring that Freyr had given him. It was wrought of the purest gold, its surface inscribed with runes of binding and blessing. As he held it up, the ring seemed to catch and concentrate the firelight until it blazed like a miniature sun. "Then accept this ring, daughter of Skirnir," he said, offering it with both hands in the ancient gesture of respect. "It is Draupnir's own brother, forged in the same fires that created Odin's ring of power. Every 9th night it will drop 8 rings of equal beauty and worth. Wear it, and you shall never want for wealth or wonder." Gerther examined the ring with the eye of one who had been raised among treasures. Its craftsmanship was indeed beyond compare, its magic unmistakable. Yet after a moment she shook her head with gentle finality. "Your lord's generosity exceeds his wisdom," she said. "I am the daughter of a giant lord. Gold is no stranger to me. This hall holds treasures that kings would die to possess. What need have I of one ring more, no matter how skillfully wrought?" A third time Skirnir reached into his cloak. This time he withdrew a smaller pouch from which he poured a handful of gemstones onto the table. They were not ordinary jewels, but star-stones gathered from the depths of Alfheim, each one containing a fragment of the first light that had shone in the void. They pulsed with their own radiance, casting rainbow patterns across the hall's walls. "Then perhaps these will please you," he said. "Star-stones from the primordial darkness, each one a piece of the light that drove back the ancient void. They are as old as creation itself and as rare as mercy from the frost giants." For the first time something flickered in Gerther's eyes, not greed but a scholar's appreciation for true rarity. She picked up one of the stones and held it to the firelight, watching the colors dance within its crystalline structure. But after a moment she set it back among its fellows with a sigh. "Beautiful," she admitted. "Truly beautiful and rarer than dragon's teeth, but beauty alone cannot change a heart that is not ready to be changed. Tell me, messenger of Freyr, what does your lord truly seek? What moves him to send such precious gifts to a stranger's hall?" The great hall fell silent as Skirnir prepared to speak the words that had brought him across the 9 worlds. He could feel the weight of every gaze upon him, Gymir's calculating attention, the curious stares of the giant courtiers, the servants paused in their duties. But most of all he was aware of Gerther herself, waiting with the patience of mountains for an answer that would justify this extraordinary embassy. "My lady," Skirnir began, his voice carrying the formal cadence of ancient oaths, "Freyr, son of Njorth, lord of Alfheim and master of the sun's warmth and the rain's blessing, has looked upon you from afar and found his heart conquered utterly." He paused, choosing his words with the care of a craftsman shaping the finest gold. 11 days ago he sat upon the All-Father's throne and saw into all the 9 worlds. His gaze fell upon you as you walked in your father's courtyard, and when you raised your arms to open the door of this very hall, light shone from your skin, light that brightened all the worlds, sea and sky alike. A ripple of movement passed through the assembled giants. This was no mere tale of infatuation, but something deeper, a god's recognition of beauty so profound it had literally illuminated the cosmos. Even Gymir leaned forward, his storm-grey eyes intent upon the messenger's words. Since that moment, Skirnir continued, "My lord has neither eaten nor drunk, neither slept nor spoken. The light of Alfheim dims in response to his melancholy, and the fertility of all the worlds begins to wane. He burns with desire for you, daughter of Gymir, as the forge burns for bellows wind, as the earth burns for spring rain." Gerther's expression had not changed, but something in her stillness suggested deep thought. When she spoke, her words carried the careful precision of one who understood the weight of divine attention. "And what would this god have of me? Does he seek a concubine for his pleasure, a trophy to display in his golden halls? Or does he offer something more substantial, something that acknowledges what I am rather than merely what I appear to be?" Skirnir straightened, feeling the full authority of his mission settle upon his shoulders like a cloak of starlight. "My lady, Freyr offers you marriage, not as conqueror to conquered, but as equal to equal. He would make you queen of Alfheim, partner in the governance of fertility and growth throughout all the worlds. Your children would be princes and princesses among the gods. Your wisdom would shape the turning of seasons and the blessing of harvests." The hall erupted in whispers and exclamations. Marriage between the races was not unknown, but a formal alliance between one of the Vanir and a giant's daughter was a matter of cosmic significance. Such unions had shaped the fate of worlds in ages past. But Geirthur's response was not what anyone expected. She rose from her place beside her father, her movement graceful as flowing water, and when she spoke, her voice carried the finality of winter's first snow. "Your lord honors me beyond my deserving," she said, "but I cannot accept what you offer. I am content in my father's hall, happy in the life I have built among my own people. Return to Freyr with my gratitude for his regard, but tell him also that some gifts cannot be accepted, no matter how generously offered." The rejection fell upon the hall like a stone into still water, sending ripples of shock through the assembled giants. Gymir's face darkened with something that might have been anger or might have been protective instinct. The courtiers exchanged meaningful glances, reading in this moment the seeds of potential conflict between the gods and giants. But Skirnir did not move. He remained standing beside the table where Freyr's gifts lay scattered like fallen stars, his weathered face showing no surprise at Geirthur's refusal. He had served his lord long enough to know that the most important battles were often won not in the first charge, but in the patient persistence that followed initial defeat. "My lady," he said quietly, his voice cutting through the whispers like a blade through silk, "I have not yet finished speaking." Something in his tone made the hall fall silent again. Geirthur, who had begun to turn away, stopped and looked back at the messenger with new attention. There was steel in his words now, the authority of one who spoke not just for himself, but for forces beyond mortal comprehension. "You have heard what my lord offers," Skirnir continued, his hand moving to rest upon the pommel of Freyr's sword. "Now hear what your refusal costs, not just to him, but to all the worlds that depend upon his grace." The sword seemed to pulse with inner light as he spoke, responding to the gravity of the moment. Around the hall, servants and courtiers pressed back against the walls, sensing that they were about to witness something that would echo through the ages. Freyr is more than a god of desire, more than a lord seeking a beautiful wife. He is the bringer of fertility to every field in Midgard, the warmth that awakens seeds in spring soil, the rain that turns drought to plenty. His happiness feeds the growing things, his sorrow blights the harvest. Skirnir's voice grew stronger, taking on the cadence of prophecy. Already the effects of his longing spread through the worlds like ripples on a cosmic pond. In Midgard, farmers report that their fields yield less grain than in seasons past. The apple trees of Asgard bear fruit more slowly, and even the eternal gardens of Alfheim show signs of decline. He paused, letting the implications sink in. This was not merely a personal matter between God and Giant's daughter. It was a crisis that threatened the fundamental order of existence. "But if you continue in your refusal," Skirnir said, his words falling like hammer blows upon anvil, "if you turn your back on the gift of divine love, then what follows will make this slight withering seem like abundance itself." Geirthur's face had grown pale, but her voice remained steady. "Are you threatening me, messenger of the gods?" "I am telling you the truth," Skirnir replied. "The truth of what happens when the balance of the worlds is disturbed by the suffering of those who maintain it. Your choice, daughter of Gymir, affects more than your own happiness. It touches the fate of every growing thing, every newborn child, every seed that waits in darkness for the touch of spring." Gymir rose from his seat, his massive frame towering over the table like a mountain against the sky. His face was dark with anger, and his voice rumbled like distant thunder when he spoke. "You go too far, messenger," he growled. "You come to my hall with gifts and fair words, but underneath lies the iron of compulsion. Do you think to frighten my daughter into compliance with talk of cosmic consequences?" But Skirnir stood his ground, meeting the giant lord's gaze without flinching. The sword at his side blazed brighter, as if responding to the challenge in Gymir's tone. I speak not of what I would do, Skirnir replied, his voice steady as stone, but of what must inevitably follow if the natural order continues disturbed. Freyr does not threaten, he suffers, and in his suffering all the worlds suffer with him. He turned back to Gerther, who watched the exchange with growing understanding in her eyes. She was no simple maiden to be swayed by pretty words or frightened by dire warnings. She was the daughter of a giant lord, raised to understand the complex interconnections that bound the 9 worlds together. Think, Lady, Skirnir urged. In your father's halls you have learned the old stories. You know how the gods maintain the balance that keeps chaos at bay. When Balder died, his sorrow nearly brought about Ragnarok itself. When Loki's mischief disrupts the natural order, earthquakes shake Midgard and storms ravage the seas. Gerther sank slowly back into her chair, her hand moving unconsciously to her throat. Around the hall, the assembled giants watched in fascination as ancient truths were laid bare before them. Freyr's domain is fertility, Skirnir continued. His joy brings abundance, his sorrow brings want. Already the signs manifest themselves. How long before crops fail entirely? How long before the children of Midgard cry for bread that cannot grow in blighted fields? He drew the sword halfway from its sheath, and the blade's light filled the hall with radiance that made every shadow sharp and clear. This is no ordinary weapon, daughter of Gymir. It is the sword that never misses its mark, that can fight without hand to guide it. But more than that, it is the instrument through which Freyr maintains his portion of cosmic order. The implications hung heavy in the air. Without the sword, Freyr would be diminished, less able to fulfill his role as guardian of growth and fertility. And if Skirnir did not return with success in his mission, the sword would remain with him, lost to its proper purpose. Choose wisely, Skirnir said quietly, sheathing the blade once more. For your choice will echo through all the halls of all the worlds, and what you decide here will be remembered until the final winter comes to claim us all. Gerther closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, something fundamental had shifted in her expression. The carefree maiden was gone, replaced by someone who understood the true weight of divine attention. "What exactly do you ask of me?" she whispered. The question hung in the air like the moment before lightning strikes. Skirnir felt the attention of every being in the hall focused upon his next words, words that would either secure his lord's happiness or condemn the world's to slow decline. "Meet him," Skirnir said simply, "in 9 nights' time at the sacred grove called Bari, where the ancient treaties were signed. Come alone, with no guard save your own wisdom, no weapon save your own heart. Speak with him as one equal to another, and judge for yourself whether divine love deserves mortal acceptance." Gerther was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the polished table surface. Around her, the assembled giants held their breath, understanding that they witnessed a moment that would reshape the relationships between their realm and Asgard. 9 nights, she repeated slowly. At Bari Grove, where the neutral ground has held sacred since the first peace between gods and giants. 9 nights, Skirnir confirmed. Long enough for you to prepare yourself, but not so long that my lord's suffering continues to blight the growing things. Long enough for wisdom, but brief enough for hope. Gymir leaned forward, his storm-grey eyes fixed upon his daughter's face. The choice is yours alone, my daughter. I will not command your acceptance any more than I will permit your coercion, but, he glanced meaningfully at Skirnir, consider well what hangs in the balance. Gerther stood once more, and this time her movement carried the authority of decision made. "Very well," she said, her voice clear and strong. "In 9 nights' time I will meet this god who claims to love me. I will hear his words and judge their worth. But understand this, messenger, I promise only to meet him. I do not promise to accept him." A collective sigh seemed to run through the hall, as if the very air had been holding its breath. Skirnir felt the tension in his shoulders ease for the first time since entering Jotunheim. It was not complete victory, but it was hope, and hope was more than he had dared expect when facing Gerthur's initial refusal. "That is all any can ask," he replied with deep gratitude. "The meeting alone may be enough. My lord seeks not conquest but connection, not submission but understanding. If you will hear him speak, if you will let him show you the depth of his regard, then perhaps love may yet find a way where force could not." He gathered Freyr's gifts from the table, returning them to the depths of his cloak. They had served their purpose, not as bribes to ensure compliance, but as demonstrations of the sincerity behind divine desire. 9 nights, Gerthur repeated, and this time there was something almost like anticipation in her voice. "Tell your lord I will be there. Tell him that Gerthur, daughter of Gymir, keeps her word once given." As Skirnir prepared to leave, she added quietly, "And tell him also that he honors me with his regard, even if I cannot yet promise to return it. That alone is a gift worthy of gods." The leave-taking from Gymir's hall was swift but courteous. The giant lord offered Skirnir rest and refreshment for the journey ahead, but the messenger politely declined. Every moment spent in comfort was another moment of Freyr's suffering, another hour in which the light of Alfheim continued to dim. As Skirnir emerged from the hall into the courtyard, he found the ring of fire still burning as fiercely as before, but the guardian hounds had withdrawn to give him clear passage. They watched his approach with intelligent eyes, these massive guardians who had witnessed the successful completion of his embassy. The largest of the hounds, the one who had first challenged his entry, approached as Skirnir mounted his silver horse. For a moment, beast and rider regarded each other with mutual respect. Then the great hound dipped its head in what could only be interpreted as acknowledgement of a mission well accomplished. "You understand, don't you?" Skirnir murmured, reaching down to touch the creature's massive head. "You know what rides on this night's work." The hound's eyes seemed to glow with inner wisdom as it stepped back and allowed horse and rider to approach the flame ring. Once again, Freyr's sword blazed with light as they neared the magical fire. The flames parted before them like a curtain drawn aside, creating a corridor just wide enough for passage. The horse leaped through without hesitation, its silver hooves striking sparks from the frozen ground beyond. The journey back through the spaces between worlds seemed swifter than the outward path, as if the very cosmos itself was eager for resolution. They passed through regions of crystalline beauty, where ice formations caught and reflected starlight in patterns that hurt the eyes to contemplate directly. They rode along paths where the aurora borealis painted the sky in sheets of green and gold, and through valleys where time itself seemed to flow like honey. As they traveled, Skirnir felt the weight of responsibility gradually shifting on his shoulders. The hardest part of his mission was complete. Gerthur had agreed to meet with Freyr, but now came the equally delicate task of preparing his lord for an encounter that would determine not just his personal happiness, but the welfare of all the growing things in all the 9 worlds. The horse's pace never slackened, carrying them steadily toward Alfheim through landscapes that existed more in dream than reality. Behind them, the realm of giants faded into distance and legend. Ahead lay the golden halls where a god waited for news that would either restore his joy or confirm his despair. 9 nights until the meeting at Barri Grove. 9 nights for Freyr to prepare himself, to gather his arguments and arrange his heart. 9 nights for the worlds to hold their breath and wait to see whether divine love could bridge the ancient gulf between god and giant. Alfheim blazed with renewed light as Skirnir's horse carried him into the courtyard of Freyr's hall. The change was immediate and unmistakable, where before the eternal radiance had been dimmed to sullen amber, Now it shone forth with something approaching its former glory. The very air seemed to sing with anticipation. Freyr met them at the threshold, his golden hair catching and reflecting the light that streamed from every surface. His face was transformed, no longer the mask of marble despair that Skirnir had left behind, but alive with hope and desperate eagerness. "What news?" Freyr demanded before his faithful servant had even dismounted. "Tell me quickly, did you reach her? Did you speak with Gerthur?" Skirnir climbed down from his silver horse, noting how his lord trembled with barely contained emotion. This was not the controlled deity who commanded sun and rain, but a being whose very essence had been laid bare by love's consuming fire. "I reached her, my lord," Skirnir replied, and saw relief flood through Freyr like dawn breaking over mountains. "I spoke with her in her father's hall, before Gymir himself and all his court. And the single word carried the weight of worlds. She will meet you. In 9 nights' time at Bari Grove, she has promised to hear what you would say to her." The sound that escaped Freyr's lips was half laugh, half sob. He reached out to grip Skirnir's shoulders, his hands shaking with the intensity of his emotion. Around them, the light of Alfheim pulsed and flared, responding to its lord's joy like flowers turning toward the sun. 9 nights, Freyr breathed. "Only 9 nights until I can speak to her myself, until I can tell her what burns within my heart." He released Skirnir and began to pace, his movements quick with barely contained energy. "But 9 nights is an eternity. How can I wait so long? How can I endure the waiting?" Skirnir watched his lord with the fond exasperation of long service. "The same way you have endured the 11 days just past, my lord, with patience and faith. But use these 9 nights wisely. Prepare yourself for this meeting as you would prepare for the most important battle of your existence." "Yes," Freyr said, seizing upon the advice like a drowning man grasping rope. "Preparation. I must think of what to say, how to show her the depth of my feeling without frightening her away. She agreed to meet me, that alone is miracle enough. I must not waste this chance through careless words or rash actions." The god turned to his faithful servant, and Skirnir saw in his lord's eyes a vulnerability that few beings in all the 9 worlds had ever witnessed. "Tell me of her, old friend. How did she seem? What manner of woman is this Gerthur who has captured my heart so completely?" For the next 9 nights, Alfheim became a realm of feverish preparation. Freyr threw himself into readying for the meeting at Bari Grove with the same intensity he had once devoted to battles against the forces of chaos. Every detail was considered, every word weighed and measured like precious metal. Skirnir found himself serving as both advisor and confidant, helping his lord navigate the unfamiliar territory of courtship. They practiced conversations, with Skirnir playing the role of Gerthur while Freyr rehearsed the words that would convey the depth of his feeling without overwhelming the object of his desire. "Remember," Skirnir counseled during one such session, "she is no mortal maiden to be dazzled by divine glory. She is the daughter of a giant lord, raised among powers nearly equal to your own. Speak to her as an equal, not as a supplicant or a conqueror." Freyr nodded, but his anxiety was visible in every gesture. "What if she finds me wanting? What if the reality of my presence fails to match whatever image she has formed from your words?" "Then you will deal with that when it happens," Skirnir replied pragmatically. "But do not borrow trouble from future days. You have won the greatest victory possible. She has agreed to meet you. Everything else is yet to be determined." The preparations extended beyond mere conversation. Freyr selected his attire with the care of a craftsman choosing tools, rich but not ostentatious, impressive but not intimidating. He chose gifts to bring, not the precious treasures he had offered through his messenger, but simpler tokens that spoke more of thoughtfulness than wealth. As the nights passed, word of the upcoming meeting spread through Alfheim and beyond. The light elves whispered of their lord's great gamble, while in Asgard itself, the gods took notice of the cosmic drama unfolding. Some offered advice, others merely watched with the interest of those who had lived long enough to see love reshape the very foundations of existence. But through it all, Freyr remained focused on the single most important moment of his existence, the meeting that would determine whether divine love could bridge the ancient divisions between god and giant, whether happiness lay in his future or merely more elaborate forms of despair. On the final night before the meeting, as he stood in his hall looking out over the radiant landscape of his realm, Freyr spoke to his faithful servant one last time. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said quietly, "I want you to know that your service has been beyond praise. You risked your life to bring me this chance, and I will never forget that debt." Skirnir smiled, the expression creasing his weathered features with genuine warmth. "My lord, I served you faithfully because that is who I am. But I undertook this mission gladly because I saw what your suffering was doing not just to you, but to all the worlds that depend upon your joy. Tomorrow we discover whether love truly can conquer all obstacles." Dawn broke clear and cold over Bari Grove, the ancient meeting place where gods and giants had signed their first treaties in the early days of the world. The trees here were older than memory, their massive trunks scarred by countless winters, but still strong enough to support branches that reached toward the sky like the arms of supplicants. Freyr arrived early, accompanied only by Skirnir and his own thundering heartbeat. He had chosen to come on foot rather than in the golden chariot that was his usual mode of travel, understanding instinctively that such display might be interpreted as either arrogance or insecurity. This meeting called for simplicity, for the honest presentation of one soul to another. The grove was exactly as the old songs described, a circle of ancient oaks surrounding a clearing where spring water bubbled up from the earth to form a pool of crystalline clarity. The ground was carpeted with moss that seemed to glow with its own soft light, and the air itself felt charged with the power of countless oaths sworn and treaties sealed in this sacred place. "She will come," Freyr murmured, as much to reassure himself as to state fact. "She gave her word, and Skirnir says she is one who honors her promises." "She will come," Skirnir agreed. "But remember, my lord, this meeting is not about conquest or persuasion. It is about truth. Show her who you truly are, not who you think she might wish you to be." They did not have long to wait. As the sun climbed higher above the ancient trees, a figure appeared at the edge of the grove, a woman walking alone through the morning shadows, her footsteps silent on the moss-covered ground. Gerther entered the clearing with the same grace that had first captured Freyr's attention from his seat on Echlith's Skyelf. She wore a simple dress of deep green wool, and her golden hair was bound back in a practical braid. But no simplicity of attire could diminish the radiance that seemed to emanate from her very being, the light that had once brightened all the worlds with its reflection. For a moment, god and giant's daughter simply looked at one another across the sacred space. The silence stretched, heavy with possibility and fraught with the weight of cosmic consequences. Then Freyr stepped forward, and when he spoke, his voice carried all the vulnerability of honest love. "Lady Gerther," he said, inclining his head in respectful greeting, "I thank you for keeping your word. I know this meeting cost you effort and perhaps some risk." "Lord Freyr," she replied, and her voice was like music heard across water on a still evening. "Your messenger spoke truly when he said you sought connection rather than conquest. I see it in your face, the same longing that has dimmed the light of your realm and caused the growing things to falter in their courses." She moved closer, studying his features with the frank attention of one who had no patience for deception. "Tell me," she said quietly, "what is it you truly seek from me? What do you hope this meeting will accomplish? Freyr felt the weight of ages in that question, the accumulated expectations of all who depended upon the outcome of this moment. But looking into Gerthur's clear eyes, he found himself able to speak with a simplicity that surprised even himself. I seek to know you, he said, not as an image glimpsed from Hlith Skyelf's high seat, not as a prize to be won or a treasure to be claimed, but as you truly are. I have been a god for longer than mortals can remember, but you have taught me something I never knew, that even divine hearts can be caught by wonder. Gerthur tilted her head, considering his words. And if knowing me proves disappointing, if the reality cannot match the vision that has caused such disruption to your peace, then I will have learned something valuable about the nature of desire and illusion, Freyr replied honestly. But I do not think that will happen. The light I saw shining from your arms was not mere physical beauty, it was something deeper, the radiance of a soul worth knowing. They began to walk together around the edge of the sacred pool, their footsteps synchronized as if they had been companions for years rather than strangers meeting for the first time. The ancient trees seemed to lean closer, as if the grove itself was eager to witness this unprecedented courtship. Your messenger spoke of marriage, Gerthur said, her tone carefully neutral, of queenship in Alfheim, of children who would be princes among the gods. These are grand offers, but they tell me nothing of what you would ask of me as a woman, as a person in my own right. Freyr stopped walking and turned to face her fully. I would ask for your companionship in the long work of tending the growing things. I would ask for your wisdom in the decisions that shape the turning of seasons. I would ask for your laughter in the evening hours, your thoughts to challenge my own, your presence to give meaning to immortal years. He paused, searching for words adequate to the depth of his feeling. I do not seek an ornament for my hall or a vessel for my heirs, though both would bring me joy. I seek a partner in the truest sense, someone whose mind can match my own, whose spirit can complement the portion of cosmic responsibility I bear. Gerthur was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the ripples spreading across the pool's surface. When she spoke again, her voice carried a thoughtfulness that had not been there before. You speak of partnership, but what do you know of me beyond the accident of beauty that caught your eye? What makes you think I could be such a companion to you? Because, Freyr said, in the brief time we have spoken, you have asked the right questions. You have looked past the surface of divine offers to examine the substance beneath. You have come here alone to face a god's courtship, showing courage that most of my own peers would admire. And, he smiled, the expression transforming his features. Because your very presence here tells me you are someone who takes responsibility seriously, who understands that individual choices can have consequences that reach far beyond the chooser. As the sun reached its zenith above Bari Grove, casting dappled light through the ancient canopy, Gerthur and Freyr continued their walk around the sacred pool. Their conversation had deepened from formal courtship to genuine exchange. She speaking of her life in Jotunheim, her studies of the natural world, her observations of the delicate balances that kept the cosmos functioning. He sharing his experiences as a guardian of fertility, the weight of responsibility that came with divine power, the loneliness that often accompanied immortal existence. I have always known that my life would be different from that of ordinary giant maids, Gerthur said, as they paused beside an oak whose trunk was scarred with runic inscriptions from ages past. My father prepared me to understand that the daughter of a lord might be called upon to make choices that serve purposes larger than personal preference. Freyr felt his heart tighten at her words. I would not have you accept me merely from duty, he said urgently. Marriage born of obligation alone serves no one well, neither spouse nor the worlds that depend upon our harmony. No, Gerthur agreed, turning to face him with eyes that held new warmth. but neither would I reject love merely because it comes dressed in the robes of cosmic necessity. I have heard your words, Lord Freyr, and I have watched your face as you spoke them. I see no deception there, no calculation, only the honest longing of one who seeks connection with another soul. She reached out to touch his hand, and at that contact, light seemed to bloom around them, not the fierce radiance of divine power, but the gentler glow of two spirits recognizing their kinship. I am not the maiden who entered this grove this morning, Gerther said quietly. That woman came here prepared to fulfill a duty and depart unchanged. But you have shown me something I had not expected, the possibility of love that enhances rather than diminishes, partnership that strengthens rather than constrains. Freyr felt the world itself seem to hold its breath around them. What are you saying? I am saying yes, Gerther replied, her voice strong and certain. Yes to marriage, yes to partnership, yes to whatever future we can build together. Not because duty demands it, and not because consequences compel it, but because my heart recognizes in yours something worth cherishing. The light that blazed forth from Alfheim at that moment was visible from every corner of the 9 worlds. In Midgard, farmers looked up from their fields and smiled without knowing why. In Asgard, the gods felt their own hearts lift in response to their kinsman's joy. Even in the depths of Jotunheim, Gymir felt a warmth touch his soul and knew that his daughter had found something precious in the sacred grove. Freyr swept Gerther into his arms, spinning her around the clearing, as laughter bubbled up from depths he had forgotten existed. When he set her down again, both were breathless with joy and the magnitude of what they had just committed to. 9 nights until our wedding, Gerther said, echoing the pattern that had brought them together. Time enough to prepare for a ceremony worthy of the love that created it. 9 nights, Freyr agreed, and then forever. The 9 nights passed in a blur of preparation that encompassed not just Alfheim, but all the realms connected to it. Word of Freyr's impending marriage spread through the 9 worlds like wildfire, and beings from every corner of existence made plans to witness the union that would bind god and giant in bonds of love and law. Alfheim itself was transformed for the occasion. The eternal gardens blazed with flowers that bloomed out of season, responding to their lord's joy with displays of beauty that left even the light elves speechless with wonder. The halls were hung with tapestries that told the story of famous loves throughout history, Odin and Frigg, Balder and Nanna, Sif and Tor, while the air itself seemed to shimmer with anticipation. Gerther arrived 3 days before the ceremony, accompanied by a cortege from Jotunheim led by her father Gymir. The giant lord's presence at a divine wedding was unprecedented, but his obvious pride in his daughter's choice smoothed any potential diplomatic difficulties. The other giants who accompanied him were the cream of Jotunheim's nobility, lords and ladies who understood that they witnessed the forging of a new alliance between their realm and Asgard. The gods, not to be outdone, sent representatives from every major family. Odin himself attended, bringing with him gifts that included a drinking horn carved from the root of Yggdrasil and blessed with runes of lasting love. Frigg presented the bride with a cloak woven from cloud-spun silk that would protect her through any weather. Tor, with characteristic bluntness, gifted the couple with his personal guarantee of protection for their children and children's children. But it was Njorth, Freyr's father, whose gift proved most meaningful. The sea god brought with him a circlet of silver and pearl that had been worn by Njorth herself in the ancient days, when she walked among mortals as goddess of the earth's fertility. This crown has been in our family since the Vanir first learned to shape the growth of living things, he explained as he placed it upon Gerther's brow. It carries the blessing of the earth itself and the wisdom of those who tend the cycles of birth and renewal. The ceremony itself took place at dawn on the appointed day, with the couple standing beside the same sacred pool where they had first spoken their hearts to one another. The ritual was ancient beyond reckoning, words of binding that had been spoken at the world's beginning, when the first marriages established the patterns that all others would follow. Skirnir, in recognition of his crucial role in bringing them together, served as the ceremony's officiant. His weathered hands joined theirs over the pool's clear water as he spoke the words that would make them one in the sight of gods and giants alike. By earth and sky, by fire and water, by the roots of Yggdrasil and the light of distant stars, I bind you together in love and lore. Let your joy bring fertility to all the worlds. Let your harmony restore the balance that your separation disturbed. As the binding words were spoken, the light that emanated from their joined hands spread outward in visible waves, washing over the assembled guests and continuing beyond to touch every corner of existence. In Midgard, the spring plantings seemed to grow visibly taller. In Asgard, Ithun's apples gleamed with renewed luster. Even in the distant realm of the dwarfs, the forges burned brighter in response to the cosmic celebration above. The wedding feast that followed the ceremony was a marvel that would be spoken of in song and story for as long as the worlds endured. Tables groaned under the weight of delicacies from every realm, honey cakes from the light elves, roasted oxen from Midgard's finest herds, wine aged in the cellars of Asgard since the time of the first peace. But more wonderful than any food or drink was the harmony that filled Alfheim's halls. Gods and giants, elves and dwarfs, all sat together in fellowship that bridged ancient divisions and created new possibilities for friendship. The marriage of Freyr and Skirnir had done more than unite two hearts. It had opened doorways between worlds that had too long remained closed. As the celebration continued into the night, Skirnir found herself surrounded by beings eager to welcome her into their extended family. Frigg shared stories of the early days when gods first learned to love mortals. Sif spoke of the challenges and rewards of marriage to one whose responsibilities touched the lives of countless others. Even the normally taciturn dwarfs offered their congratulations and promises of friendship for the years ahead. Freyr, meanwhile, was discovering the joy of watching his new bride navigate her first evening as a goddess. Her natural grace and quick wit served her well in conversations with beings whose customs were strange to her, while her genuine interest in their domains and concerns quickly won the respect of even the most traditional gods. "She will do well among us," Odin observed to Njorth as they watched the newlyweds dance to music played by the finest musicians in all the worlds. "Your son has chosen wisely, not just for his own happiness, but for the welfare of all who depend upon his domain." Njorth smiled, his sea-weathered face creased with paternal pride. "I have seen many marriages in my long existence, All-Father. Some are born of passion that burns bright and brief, others from duty that endures but never warms the heart. This one has the rarest quality of all. It serves both love and law, both personal desire and cosmic necessity." As midnight approached and the celebration began to wind toward its close, Skirnir found himself standing apart from the crowd, watching with satisfaction as his lord and lady prepared to begin their new life together. The faithful servant's mission was complete, not just the embassy that had brought them together, but the longer service that had taught him to recognize when true love justified any risk. "Well done, old friend," Freyr said, appearing beside him with Skirnir on his arm. "Without your courage and wisdom, none of this would have been possible." "The courage was yours, my lord," Skirnir replied with a bow. "You dared to love without knowing whether that love would be returned. That is the bravest act of all." Skirnir smiled, her face radiant with the happiness that had restored light to all the worlds. "And now we begin the real adventure, learning to build a life together, learning to be partners in both love and the cosmic responsibilities that love has brought us." As the last guests departed and the halls of Alfheim settled into peaceful quiet, the new couple stood together at their window, looking out over the restored gardens where eternal flowers bloomed in response to their joy. The 9 worlds were whole once more, the balance restored by love freely given and gratefully received. In the distance, Yggdrasil's mighty branches swayed in a wind that carried the promise of countless springs to come, countless harvests blessed by the harmony between god and giant that would endure until the ending of all things. Love had indeed conquered all obstacles, and the cosmos itself sang in celebration of the victory won not through force or compulsion, but through the patient courage of hearts willing to risk everything for the possibility of connection across the vast distances that separate soul from soul. Years passed in Alfheim, flowing like the gentle streams that watered the eternal gardens. Freyr and Gerthur's marriage proved as fruitful as any could hope, their love a constant source of renewal that kept the cycles of growth and harvest turning smoothly throughout all the connected worlds. Their children, when they came, were indeed princes and princesses among the gods, but more than that, they were bridges between the realms of their parents. In them, the strength of giants mingled with the wisdom of the Vanir to create new possibilities for understanding between peoples who had too long seen each other as fundamentally different. Skirnir, grown old in faithful service, often told the story of the journey that had made it all possible, the desperate embassy through fire and ice, the patient negotiation in Gymir's hall, the delicate courtship in Bari Grove. Young gods and giants would listen with wonder to tales of love so powerful it had literally illuminated the cosmos, of loyalty so deep it had risked everything for a master's happiness. But perhaps the greatest testament to the marriage success was the simple fact of the world's continued prosperity. The fields of Midgard yielded their harvests year after year. The apple trees of Asgard bore fruit that sustained the gods in their eternal vigil, and the gardens of Alfheim bloomed with flowers that had never known winter's touch. In quiet moments, when the day's duties were done and the evening light painted everything in shades of gold and amber, Freyr and Gerthur would walk together through the paths they had made their own. They spoke of many things, the governance of growing things, the raising of their children, the delicate work of maintaining harmony between realms that had once viewed each other with suspicion. And sometimes, when the mood was right and the stars shone particularly bright in Alfheim's eternal sky, they would speak of the journey that had brought them together, the god who had risked everything for love, the giant's daughter who had found courage to accept a destiny larger than herself, and the faithful servant whose loyalty had made it all possible. "Do you ever regret it?" Freyr asked one such evening as they stood beside the pool where their courtship had begun. "The life you left behind, the simpler existence you might have had." Gerthur smiled, her face still radiant with the inner light that had first caught divine attention. "How can I regret the choice that brought such happiness not just to us, but to all the worlds? This is what love should be, not a selfish taking, but a generous giving that enriches everything it touches." She took his hand, and once again light seemed to bloom around them, not the fierce radiance of power, but the gentler glow of two souls that had found their perfect complement in each other. In that light, the very cosmos seemed to nod approval, the ancient trees to whisper blessings, the eternal flowers to bloom with renewed beauty. And so their story joined the great songs that would be sung until Ragnarok itself, a tale of love that bridged every division, loyalty that overcame every obstacle, and the courage to believe that some things are worth any risk, any sacrifice, any journey through fire and darkness to the possibility of joy beyond imagining. The 9 worlds turned in their courses, sustained by the harmony between god and giant that had grown from a single glimpse of light shining from bare arms in a distant courtyard. And in the golden halls of Alfheim, love continued its patient work of tending all the growing things, ensuring that spring would always follow winter, that hope would always triumph over despair, and that the cosmic dance would continue until the very ending of all things. Thus ends the tale of Skirnir's journey for Freyr, a story that teaches us that love, when it is true and freely given, has the power to heal divisions that seem permanent, to bridge distances that seem impossible, and to create harmony where once there was only longing and separation. In the end, it is not the strength of giants or the power of gods that shapes the worlds, but the courage of hearts willing to reach across every barrier in search of connection, understanding, and the possibility of shared joy. Rest now and let the memory of their love warm your dreams, knowing that somewhere in the golden halls of Alfheim, the Lord of Light and his giant queen still tend the growing things with hands joined in love and hearts united in purpose. The cosmos is safe in their care, and spring will always come again to bless the patient earth with new life and renewed hope.